With the gift of hindsight, let's go back and look at some of 2022's biggest trades.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. We're proudly part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is made possible by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So this is another show idea that came from listeners of this show, from the everydayers, from the prospectors, is going back and looking at the biggest trades of 2022 to figure out who won, who lost, were the grades that we gave correct, and how some of these deals aged in 2023. The biggest deal of last year and of recent history, obviously, Juan Soto to the Padres. So reminder of this deal, because it's been long enough where you may not necessarily be thinking about exactly how big this gosh darn trade was. Okay, so Juan Soto and first baseman Josh Bell went from the Nationals to the Padres. The Padres turn around and send 6 players to the Nationals. Right-hand pitcher Mackenzie Gore, infielder CJ Abrams, Luke Voit, first baseman Luke Voit, ended up being the replacement for Eric Hosmer when he decided this would not be a cool bro, and he exercised his no-trade clause on the deal. And then prospects Robert Hassell, outfielder, James Wood, outfielder, and Jarlin Susana, the right-handed pitcher. And Soto going to the Padres, he wasn't the usual Juan Soto that you were expecting in 2022. He struggled a little bit down the stretch, right? So 52 games, batted .236 with a .388 on base and a .390 slug, which are significantly below what you would expect from Juan Soto. He had 6 homers, 15 extra base hits. But in 2023, he was Juan Soto, played all 162 games, one of, I think, 4 players that did that. Soto, Marcus Semien, Matt Olson, and then there's someone else I'm forgetting. Let me know in the comments if you remember who it is. But batted .275, .410, .519, 35 home runs, 68 extra base hits with 132 walks to 129 strikeouts. That's right, he walked more than he struck out in the major leagues. He was an all-star. He was a silver slugger in left. They moved him over to left field. And he came in 6th place in the National League MVP voting. So Juan Soto is Juan Soto and had a Juan Soto year in 2023. Now, obviously, referencing last week, there is discussion because of how much money he's expected to be owed in the final year before free agency that he's going to be moved. We talked about that last week. I'll link it up here for those of you on YouTube, and it's available in the podcast feed for those of you on audio. But this package, if you go back and you look at it after we've had a year plus to look at how this package went, it's hard to argue the Nationals didn't win this, right? Not every piece of that return has been great, mind you. Jarlin Susana spent the entire year in Single-A Fredericksburg, and granted, age 19 season, there's still plenty of time, but went 1-6 with a 5.14 ERA and walked almost 6 batters per 9 innings. Not great. Again, still plenty of time, and had seen nothing that would make you think he'd be anything like that the year of the trade in 2022. Robert Hassell hasn't necessarily been great, but you've got James Wood, who is one of the top corner outfield prospects in baseball. We talked about him on that show. Him and Dylan Cruz form a nice 1-2 tandem at the top of this farm system and very high up in the prospect rankings. And then CJ Abrams doesn't really get discussed as a very good MLB shortstop. Like, he doesn't get the credit I think he deserves. And the overall numbers aren't necessarily fantastic, right? He batted .245, 300, .412 last year. And struggled against lefties, batted .166 against lefties. But if you go to the NFBC draft boards, remember we talked about that a couple weeks ago where the top prospects were getting drafted. As of Wednesday afternoon, he is the sixth shortstop coming off the board in NFBC drafts. It's Bobby Witt, Trey Turner in round 1. It's Corey Seager and Francisco Lindor in round 2. It's Bo Bichette in round 3 and CJ Abrams in round 4. And after that, there's a big drop. It's like 7th round when you see the next guy, and that's O'Neal Cruz. So he's being considered up there in that tier of the top shortstops in fantasy for 2024. So what you ended up getting out of this deal, if you are the Nationals, you took a player that you tried to give stupid amounts of money to and turned it down. You get to take, you get rid of that player and you turn it into Mackenzie Gore, who I think I said was a righty, but is actually a lefty. You turn it into Mackenzie Gore, who 27 starts this year and showed there's a lot of potential there. Struck out 10 batters per 9 innings, walked under 4 guys per 9. The ERA was 4.42. The team also wasn't that great. He handled the jump in innings from this year to up to 136. So you feel good about breaking 150 innings next year. You turned it into CJ Abrams, who is a promising young player at shortstop. You turned it into a top 25 prospect right now in James Wood. You still have the ability to work on Robert Hassel, and you have a young lottery ticket in Jarlin Susana that can work out. Meanwhile, the Padres are looking to move him, and so we'll have to come back and reevaluate this again when you see what they traded Juan Soto for in a couple weeks, the winter meetings next week, wherever it may be. The other Padres related, there was multiple deals, but the other big Padres deal here was Josh Hader from the Brewers to the Padres. And the return was 2 veteran arms, like over 30-year-old pitchers. I don't even remember their names. That's how much they don't matter. Outfielder Stewie Ruiz and pitcher Robert Gasser. And it's hard not to call this a win for the Brewers as well, simply because, and not because of Hader. He was in a bad stretch, obviously. He looked good last year for what he pitched. But for what they were able to do, they took Esteury Ruiz and flipped him in that 3-team Sean Murphy deal to get William Contreras. They got their catcher of the future, which is funny that the Devil Magic catching team had to go get a catcher from outside, but they got him and made him one of the best defensive catchers in baseball in like an offseason. It's scary how they do that. And then they still have prospect Robert Gasser. Really funny how quickly they accelerated him. He was in high A with San Diego. After the trade, he went to AA and AAA in 2022, and then in 2023 spent the entire season in AAA. 26 starts, 9-1 with a 3.79 ERA in 135 and a third innings, 166 strikeouts, so 11 strikeouts per 9, to 50 walks. 3.3 per 9 and 12 home runs allowed, so 0.8 home runs per 9 innings. He's probably going to debut this year. Brandon Woodruff is gone. Corbin Burns is probably getting traded. He's going to debut this year. I still don't necessarily know if he's anything but a back-end guy. When you look at, I'm looking at his AAA StatCast from last season right now, and it's one of those, okay, fastball sits around 92 miles an hour. That's inherently already limiting a bit. He throws both a four-seamer and a sinker. And then when you look at the other pitches, he throws a cutter, he throws a curveball, he throws a slider, he throws a changeup, and he broke out a little bit of a sweeper there too. And this is a stereotype, but those guys that throw 6 or 7 pitches, those kitchen sink kind of guys, they usually don't have 6 or 7 pitches because they're all really good. They have 6 or 7 pitches because nothing is that great, and they have to be able to keep you off balance with all this different stuff. You think a four-seamer's coming, it turns out it's a sinker, and you roll over it and get a ground out. Or you're trying to sit curveball, and all of a sudden a cutter comes in. He whips out you're expecting a slider, and a sweeper comes. Like, guys who throw all of these pitches don't typically do it because all of these pitchers are really good. They do it because maybe at best one of them is above average. And so they're just throwing everything at you. But either way, you took Josh Hader, a year and a couple months, Josh Hader, and turned him into your catcher of the future and a potential back into the rotation starter. That's a good deal for the Brewers, and it worked out. In just a minute, there's a couple deals that did not work out at all, and we'll talk about those next right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is incredibly easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options. Spreads, player props, over-unders. They make specialty bets for special occasions. They had some fun ones on Thanksgiving where they combined multiple games into special things. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Okay, so some of the trades that happened at the deadline last year absolutely did not work out for one of those teams. The one that stands out the most to me, it's not the two biggest teams, but the one where it's just incredibly easy to see how bad this deal went, was Tyler Mahle from the Reds to the Twins. And the Twins lost this deal. Okay, so the reminder here is Tyler Mahle goes over to the Twins. He has a year plus of control, so it's a year and a couple months. And the return is left-hand pitcher Steven Hadger, who is actually not even with the Reds anymore. I'll get to that in a second. First baseman Christian Encarnacion Strand, and infielder Spencer Steer. If you can see the issue with the deal, there you go. What does Mahle do when he's with the Twins? He gets 4 games after the deadline, goes 1-1 with a 4.41 ERA, 16 1/3 total innings. Now that last start was abbreviated. The last 2 starts, I think, were abbreviated. He went in, he came out. Second one, he went in, came out. Then he goes on the IL with shoulder inflammation. Not great. He did not come back that season. The next year, 2023, starts off looking pretty good, actually. 5 starts, he's 1-2. Wins don't matter. Pitcher wins are not a real stat. 3.16 ERA, 25 2/3 innings, 28 strikeouts, only 5 walks, but gives up 5 home runs, and then boom, Tommy John surgery. Out for all of the rest of this year, and probably out for most, if not all, of 2024, based on when he actually had the surgery. So, golly, that really sucks, right? And now he's a free agent. You can go sign him to a multi-year deal, let him rehab in 24, come back to a mound probably late, probably keep him on rehab stuff for the end of the year, and then have him in your rotation in 2025. Now, turning around, those 2 guys that they sent, not counting Steven Hadger, again, not even in the organization. He went on 2 starts, or he had 2 starts, then went on the IL, and then ended up being the final piece of the Will Benson deal with Cleveland. He ended up being a player to be named later. And the way that typically works, they give him a list, and you just pick from the list. And he was the final piece of the Will Benson deal. He's not even with the Reds, but despite that, it's still a win for the Reds because Christian Encarnacion Strand gets in 63 games. He was the next to last person in that group to get called up. Noelvi Marte was the last one, but he was the next to last guy to get called up in that group of Steer, McLean, Ellie De La Cruz, all that. In the 63 games, 270, 328, 477, 13 home runs, 20 extra base hits, 14 walks to 69 strikeouts. It's nice production. Spencer Steer is the real, even just Spencer Steer alone would have been a win. 156 games for Spencer Steer. I believe he broke spring training with the team. He actually came up and played a little bit at the end of the year in 22. After the trade deadline, he came up and got almost 30 games. But 156 games for Spencer Steer this year. 271, 356, 464, 23 home runs, 63 extra base hits, 68 walks to 139 strikeouts, and 15 of 18 on stolen bases. He played first. He played third. He played a little bit of second. He played left field. He played right field. He wasn't great in any of those, but he played all of them. He ended up being 6th place in National League Rookie of the Year voting. And the Twins got 42 innings of Tyler Mahle, and they gave up Spencer Steer and Christian Encarnacion Strand to do it. Obviously, if you could go back and redo this, it's not happening. You're not making that deal. Another team that absolutely lost their trade was the Yankees making a trade with the Oakland A's. The Yankees go out and get starter Frankie Montas. They get reliever Lou Trevino. Looked good when he was able to pitch. He had 20-something outings, looked really good, low ERA, got hurt, ended up having Tommy John, missed this entire season. I believe he's a free agent now. Frankie Montas, 6.35 ERA down the stretch after the trade. Comes out this year, is dealing with, I think he has like arthroscopic shoulder surgery in spring, doesn't get back on the mound to the very end of the year. It is a completely lost year, and now he's a free agent. The only thing that caused this deal from not leading off probably either this segment or this show for how bad it was the fact that the guys they traded haven't really done a lot either. Left-hand pitcher Ken Waldichuk, right-hand pitcher Luis Medina, left-hand pitcher JP Sears. You sent 3 different pitchers to Oakland in the deal, and second baseman Cooper Bowman. One of the things that I've said on this show a lot, and kind of jokingly, but I've always, like I've said, if the Tampa Bay Rays call you to try to get an infielder that you have in the minors, hang up and figure out why. And I've also said if the Atlanta Braves call you and offer you a pitcher, maybe say no and hang up. And the fact that none of these guys were really that great in Oakland, I don't know how much of that was Oakland, and I don't know how much of that was the Yankees. We've talked about how the Yankees have quite a few pitching prospects right now with Will Warren and Drew Thorpe, like all these different guys. Part of me wonders how much of it was they went to Oakland and Oakland was charitably, and I apologize, A's fans, a dumpster fire this year and there was no way they were going to succeed, and how much of it was the Yankees knew or had a pretty good idea of which of the pitching prospects were going to work out and which ones were not, and they found a team who would take the ones that they knew would not work out. If that's the case, that they figured out they could identify which ones would and would not work out, then the Yankees might become one of those teams that you probably should hang up the phone if they call you and offer you a bunch of pitching prospects. Because that was a complete... The fact that Montas and Trevino didn't work out doesn't mean that it was a good deal on Oakland's part to take the quantity of guys when none of them worked out. But this isn't here because the Yankees absolutely ended up being a whiff on all of this, all of their return. They got nothing in 2023 out of these guys, and they got very little in 22 other than Trevino's decent relief stint, and they gave up quite a bit to do it. Honorable mention here because it started off, or it appeared to be a salary dump, and it just, even that did not work really well, was the Atlanta Braves getting reliever Raisel Iglesias from the Los Angeles Angels for Jesse Chavez and Tucker Davidson. So the reason this is in here is, yes, it was a salary dump. They wanted to get out from under Iglesias' salary. He was making $10 million in 2022, and then he was going to make $16 million in 23, 24, and 25. So it was a lot of money to get rid of, right? But when Iglesias got to Atlanta, I'm pretty confident in saying he was the best reliever in baseball down the stretch. 28 games, 26 and a third innings, 0.34 ERA. He gave up 1 earned run in 28 games down the stretch. Stepped right into Atlanta's closing role, was Atlanta's closer this year, 33 saves, I believe it was 37 opportunities, so pretty respectable percentage. Struck out 11 batters per 9, finished with an ERA of 2.75. You will absolutely take that right in line with his career when the Angels gave him that big deal. But Jesse Chavez and Tucker Davidson absolutely did not work out for the Angels. Chavez was released within a couple weeks of the deal. And he turned right around and went right back to Atlanta and looked significantly better in Atlanta than he looked in that stretch he was in LA, which is just hilarious to me. I think it's the second time Atlanta's traded him away, and then he's made his way back with either that season or relatively quickly after that. Tucker Davidson also did not work out for the Angels, and last year got moved from the Angels to the Royals, and then after that was waived and was selected by the Orioles and still did not pitch. Did not look great. He's not even arbitration eligible until 2025, but he still got waived by LA and then traded by LA and then waived by Kansas City. So did not work out at all. In just a minute, there were a few trades last year that did work out, it feels like, for both teams. We'll cover that next right here on Locked on MLB Prospects. Final segment of the Thursday show of Locked on MLB Prospects. Lindsey Crosby, your host here, talking about trades from the 2022 trade deadline that did or did not work out in retrospect. And there's a couple deals. Player-for-player swaps are always really interesting. They're called challenge trades by some people because it's, in essence, what you're saying is we think that you had promise and we think that you're not as good as that other guy. So we're going to swap you 1-for-1 for that other guy. Now, it's not always that dynamic. The first one that I want to talk about was not that dynamic. It was Brandon Marsh going from the Angels to the Phillies and prospect Logan O'Hoppe going from the Phillies to the Angels. This was it wasn't a challenge trade. It was a 1-for-1, and I want to put it in here because it seemingly worked out for everybody. Brandon Marsh has been a good part of that team for 2 postseason runs now, where Logan O'Hoppe came up and immediately looked pretty good in that small sample that he got in 2022. Batted .286. I don't think he hit any home runs in that small sample, but 2 walks and 3 strikeouts was not bad. This year, got injured, had a shoulder issue, and so he missed a lot of time, got a total of 51 games, but batted .236 with a .500 slug, 14 home runs in 51 games while showing some pretty decent defense. So it's a small sample size. He's got 56 games in LA, but he absolutely showed that he has what appears to be the tools needed to be the catcher of the future for the Los Angeles Angels. There's just a question about the standard dysfunction that we've seen at times with the Angels at the major league level, but it feels like this deal worked out okay. Another deal, solely rental based. These 2 guys both left after the season, but Harrison Bader for Jordan Montgomery. Jordan Montgomery has been traded multiple times at the deadline, and honestly, he's continued to perform every single time. He was a member of the New York Yankees. He goes to the St. Louis Cardinals in return for center fielder Harrison Bader. The Cardinals always have tons of extra outfielders. Montgomery does pretty well after the trade, makes 11 starts, 3.11 ERA, 6-3 record, has a complete game shutout, and then gets moved this year at the deadline to the Texas Rangers, goes on 2.79 ERA down the stretch, pitches well in the postseason, gets a World Series ring. So it worked out well there. Harrison Bader's bounced around a little bit more, but both of those guys did what the teams needed them to do down the stretch. And so I think that was a good deal, even though Harrison Bader did not spend all of this year with the Yankees, still was a good deal for both teams to do a swap of guys there. The last one, Jorge Lopez was the closer for the Orioles. Went from the Orioles to the Twins for a 4-player package. It was highlighted by reliever Yanier Cano, pitcher Cade Povich, and then 2 prospects. Lopez never really seemed to find his groove with Minnesota, right? So he had been ERA in 2022 for Baltimore at time of the trade was a 1.68. He put up a 4.37 down the stretch for Minnesota in 22. In 23, had a 5.09 down the stretch. They move him to Miami. Miami ends up waiving him, and he rejoins the Baltimore Orioles in September. So not eligible for the postseason roster because he joined in September. But it was That was interesting. And then you flip around and you look at what Cano was able to do. He was an all-star in 2023. So down the stretch in 22, it did not look very promising. 3 outings, 18.69 ERA, 9 earned runs in 4 1/3 innings. Looks a little iffy, right? I think it was he walked 5 guys in 4 1/3 innings. In Baltimore this year, 1-4 record. Again, wins don't matter. 2.11 ERA with 65 strikeouts in 72 2/3 innings. Picks up 8 saves as the primary holds guy. Had like 31 holds, but stepped in late to do some saves. Ended up 8 of 14 on saves. And then to go along with that, there's also some prospects, including Cade Povich, and he's the one that I think could have really taken this over the top to have this be an absolute win and put it in the second segment for just being a disaster for the Twins to make the move. But he struggled this year between AA and AAA, 28 games started by Cade Povich, 8-10 with a 5.04 ERA. It was 126 2/3 innings. Now, the stuff looked good as far as getting swing and miss. 171 strikeouts, so 12.2 per 9. Also had some walk issues, 66 walks, 4.7 per 9. Also had some home run issues, 18 home runs, so 1.3 home runs per 9 innings. So obviously not ideal, wasn't terrible, but not ideal. As you know, for some of the ancillary production, and then the ERA, things like that, not great. The strikeout potential's there, but just shows that you need more starting pitching options in Baltimore, and just another reason why Baltimore has to be more aggressive this offseason at going out, trying to find free agents, and hopefully making an actual signing, spending some actual money, but making some trades to bring in some more pitching options there to supplement this very talented young core. Fantastic week this week. One more show coming tomorrow. Next week, we are on site at the winter meetings. Going to be really excited. Going to be in Nashville for most of the week. The Rule 5 draft is next week, so we're going to bring you an episode kind of previewing some of that, some of what we're hearing while we're up there, refreshers on how it goes, things like that. If you have questions for Monday's mailbag, we'll be doing the mailbag from up in Nashville on Sunday night at the winter meetings. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Farm. Tons of ways to reach us in the episode description, in the show notes. We have a Discord, we have a subtext, email, all of that good stuff. So we want to hear from you on that. Let me know what you want to hear in the month of December, because when January rolls around, we're going to be doing 6 shows a week. We're going to be doing the Monday mailbag and then the 5 farm system previews every single week. So we're going to have 6 weeks of content to take us all the way up to spring training. So if you have show ideas, things like that you want to hear about, let's get them in December, because January and part of February is pretty booked. In the meantime, until tomorrow's show, remember, it's always a great time to pay a minor leaguer.